deeper, Djokovic made some very interesting comments over the last, in one of his most recent press conferences that stirred up a lot of controversy, and that we thought might be really interesting and smart to get some folks across tennis, pickleball, and paddle together to talk about those comments. With us today is Ben Nichols, who's going to be doing a lot of the moderating. I'm going to be doing pot stirring. Ben's going to be doing question asking. Ben is the CEO, owner of Padel 22. We have Jonathan Fralick, National Director of Racket Sports for Invited Clubs. Bryce Morgan, President of the PPA Tour. We have Brian Dillman, CEO of the USPTA, the United States the United States Professional Tennis Association. Jake Weiss, who is the Director of Research and Insights from the USTA. And Ryan Redondo, all the way from the West Coast, the CEO of Taktika Padel and the San Diego Stingrays. Welcome, 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 everyone. How we doing?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
I'm going to keep this energy up. There's a lot of us. But again, I'm going to toss it over to Ben in a second to go a little bit deeper. But for those who are watching, please submit questions, comments. I'm going to be watching them. Ben's going to be asking some questions. We want this to feel discussion-based, not like a question and answer robotic thing. So one audience who's watching, definitely let's get some chatter going. Panelists, I expect lots of interesting comments from you all. So feel free to chime in, challenge in the most respectful way, and create some really good dialogue for our folks who are watching. All right?
Great.
Deal. Great. Ben, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Robyn, and hi everyone. Good to see you all, and hi everyone listening in live or in a recording, obviously down the line. Great to interject our summer with this kind of timely intervention, I suppose, from Novak, and a discussion we all tend to have in our own groups anyway. I want to get straight to that kind of overall question, which is the sort of stimulus for this session, really. A discussion that does come up, certainly in my world of paddle, and I'm sure in pickleball as well, and other racket sports, given kind of tennis's stature, as the giant, I suppose, of racket sports worldwide. Ryan, I'll start with you. Obviously, you've got I know it well, Taktika. I know obviously your background in tennis and having moved into paddle, but you've embraced pickleball with the facilities on the West Coast. Tell us a little bit about your reaction to something like Novak Djokovic's comments, and obviously the context of them. We see the headlines of the context is, he's a tennis guy, he's supportive of tennis, but he's very aware at the recreational level that clubs maybe need to evolve, times change, and we need to look at all racket sports holistically to ensure tennis keeps going and keeps thriving as the upstart racket sports continue to grow. So tell us about your kind of gut reaction, how you see those in light of what he said.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me with this great group here. Well, funny enough, so we sell courts as well. We are the distributors for Padel Galice paddle courts. And when Djokovic made that comment, I quickly got several calls from club owners that said, hey, yeah, we're going to buy those courts now. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. One, I had been working and giving them all the discussions and time to let them know the stats on paddle and why it's so important. And somebody of that stature coming in and saying paddle and pickleball and stuff, gives it the credibility that it is something to take very serious, and that it's very positive. And it is that rising tides lifts all. There is that opportunity to serve different community members and bring other people into racket sports. So that's kind of just the baseline comment that I had and experience. And in regard to our model and how we're trying to promote paddle and other racket sports, as we believe that they are synergistic. They work together. What I have found personally is the tennis community evolves a little bit more into paddle. Pickleball kind of stays in their lane and plays it themselves. They don't venture off into paddle as much as I thought they would. But you do see tennis players with pickleball. So at the end of the day, what I say is if it's putting a racket in somebody's hand and it's making them happy, they're a healthier person. We're a healthier community. So that's the drive that we're doing, is making sure that we can serve everybody playing the sport. And with that said, we're bringing in different players that have never even hit a ball before. They're trying different things. We're doing 3 sport racket camps for summer camps for kids, et cetera, et cetera. So we're seeing that they all work together, and we're trying to really promote and develop paddle in that way by helping tennis and pickleball.
Ryan, you said, I'm going to chime in really quick, Ben. Ryan, you said you're doing 3 sport camps, racket camps for people. Tell just a little bit, I think from a pipeline standpoint, that's amazing for everyone to understand and just hear, I think, a little bit more about how the success of that is.
Yeah, it was extremely successful all summer long. We had different options. You can just do tennis, or you can do our all racket sport camp for kids.
That's
and
awesome.
What we found is, we were filling up our courts with pickleball and paddle. I would sit by the door, the entryway exit, as kids would leave summer camp, and I would just say, "Hey, did you have fun today? What was your favorite sport?" Almost every single time it was paddle. I loved it. And they were,
I think some people on this call might have some beef to say about that one.
But a couple of things with that, and we had kids from Mexico coming to play, so they had a little bit more experience, but it all made their tennis better. So by being able to learn and getting on a pickleball court and hitting a ball, or on the paddle court, by the time they were on to the tennis court, they were actually probably way ahead, as if instead of just going out and playing tennis. So on the developmental side, there's going to be a lot of benefits from all the racket sports, and we need to look closely at that, in my opinion. If we want to develop the next tennis champions, how can we continue to do that? We have some of the best junior tennis players in the country, in the world, for that matter, and we bring them onto the paddle court to practice their volleys, to get them in an Eastern grip, teach them how to hit a continental grip, and they're winning national championships. They're getting ATP points, et cetera. So you have to have an open mind. You have to have that growth mindset to understand that they can help each other.
I think it's really healthy to hear that. We don't hear enough about that kind of the mix of the racket sports. Maybe it's not, fashionable, certainly amongst the media, to say, everyone can be a winner if they've got a racket in their hand. But it's logical, isn't it, to see that people pick up a racket or a paddle, and they're naturally going to want to try another racket sport because they're exposed to these facilities where there's other sports there. Brian, I kind of want to just jump to you as well. Obviously, coming from the USPTA, it's an interesting one because obviously we know the background in tennis, but you've adopted, you've done a partnership with a paddle court company. You've taken on the paddle coaches certification with Marcos, and we all love Marcos and what he's done for the sport. You must believe as an organization in the future of paddle, and I'm guessing here, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing seeing these sports, as part of the racket sports collective in a way to make these moves as an organization. How do you, is that a fair assumption that I've made there? And secondly, I think going back to Novak's comments, what was your reaction when you saw them?
So I have to take his comments in 2 different sections. One, when he said the club model is broken and it's at risk, I don't think he's actually been to a club in the United States and hung out with the activity and seen what's going on. On the other side, on the Padel side, and with what Pickle and Padel are doing for the racket sports industry, I think it's amazing. And I think at the end of the day, it's the consumer who decides. And the consumer is the one deciding to play Pickle, to play Padel, tennis, platform squash. I mean, we are in all of those businesses. But what I've seen now is, and I think Ryan nailed it, all racket sports are good. And I think what Pickle has done for us is it's created this social community aspect, which tennis got lazy at, frankly. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, tennis was vibrant, and they were pushing local governments to build more courts and build more courts. Well, good for Pickle to do that. I mean, they picked up the phone and they organized their communities and they got courts built, and they're, now the infighting between tennis and Pickle, I think, needs to stop. I think we can all live in our own ecosystems, because I think tennis and Padel do sit in a little separate category because they are a little more difficult skills to learn and they take more time to develop. But this whole ecosystem of racket sports is amazing for the industry because there's never been a better time. There's investment, there's jobs and careers that there've never been before. So from our perspective, I think the more that people can use that court utilization model of, like what you said, Ryan, have three racket sports together as a camp, or have different programming for each individual with their needs, is amazing. And I think we all need to band together, like what we're talking about, to be able to promote all of these sports, because it is certainly better than complacency, lethargy, and the couch.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, you've obviously, with invited clubs, you've got, a family of, well, the number I've got is 158 country clubs. That might be outdated already, but the stats, 700 odd tennis courts, 300 to 400 pickle, I think now, 2 Padel. I mean, that doesn't suggest, in a microcosm, that doesn't suggest Padel could be threatening tennis in a way, if you want to look at it simplistically. But I imagine that number is fast going to change. Tell us a little bit about that model, where the direction of traffic is in terms of the growth of Padel and pickle, which is already making a huge inroad into your kind of balance of the 3 racket sports. And again, reflections on Novak's comments, which they're really pertinent to an organization like yours.
Yeah, what needless to say, Novak's comments were very quickly texted around our company, and it was, okay, Jonathan, what's the next strategy for Padel? Here's where we are, right? We want our members at the club as many days a week as possible. Okay, they play golf. Historically, they played tennis. Now they play golf, they play pickleball, they play tennis, and in some cases they play Padel. So we've got our members now at the club 4 and 5 days a week, which is ultimately the goal. Okay, some stats that we have. So we had 1 million court reservations last year across all of our clubs. We had 700,000 tennis reservations, and we had 300,000 pickleball reservations. The reason why that number jumps off is in 2021, we only had 16 pickleball courts. Okay, now we have 463. Okay, so that's in 2.5 years, we've grown exponentially. Mm-hmm. What we are also finding is we're attracting a player that was a non-traditional racket sports, which was a golfer, someone who didn't feel they had the hand-eye coordination to play tennis. So they came into pickleball. So over these 3 years of conversation, it's been pickleball versus tennis, tennis versus pickleball. We are having crossover now where pickleball is coming into tennis. Tennis is going into pickleball. We're using it in our junior programs where they're using pickleball and tennis camps. We obviously, Padel's new to us, but we're showing growth in all the different categories. The other side of it is we're also building tennis courts. So where everybody is, tennis is this, tennis is that. We're building tennis courts across the country, not at the same clip as pickleball, but we are building them. In terms of Padel, right, they're unique markets right now, okay? And the infrastructure is a bit more expensive than converting a tennis court to for pickleball. So we are kind of building out in the markets such as LA at Braemar. Obviously, we're already at Brookhaven. We're looking at a club down in Miami, and then Houston's going to be our big target. All we're trying to do is grow racket sports, okay? And right now, all the partners, and I work with Bryce, and I work with Ryan, and all the partners right now want the same thing. And whatever we read in social media, whatever we read in the news is not completely accurate in the club space. We don't have people screaming and hollering about each other's sports. There's a respect. Now, we have some areas where we've had to use silent technology for pickleball because of the proximity of homes. But right now, for Invited, we're extremely excited that racket sports has a resurgence, because if what we're reading is accurate, golf is actually declining a bit right now. So we need another core business that's going to keep our members at the club.
Got it. Jake, I will come to you in a second. I'm really interested to hear the tennis perspective. I'm sure we all are. But Bryce, pickleball, we know about the growth and the fast growth in the recent years. And I'm sure the growth internationally that's going to happen. People don't talk about that so much, but that will happen too. What did you think of Novak's comments? Like, I want to ask everyone here, just to get the elephant out of the proverbial room, I suppose.
Yeah, of course.
Secondly, it's been again a kind of public sort of headline, certainly in the media, of pickleball and tennis and a bit of a family dispute, let's say. Is that the reality, or is that actually all harmonious and happy families?
No, those are great questions. And for sure, we also had our own little banter around the office, like, hey, pickleball's arrived. We're getting bona fide. We're getting mentioned in, by somebody like Novak Djokovic. But anyway, so the second part of your question, that's like Jonathan Fralick can answer that as well. Like, we've worked together for a long time in our relationship. At the beginning, he was like, I don't even know about this pickleball, but we see the trends changing. You mentioned it already. Ryan, you mentioned all everybody rides with the tide, right? It's good if everybody's playing it. And then Brian, you mentioned pickleball it's an easy barrier to entry. And I always talk about it being, I can play with my daughter, my mom, and my grandma at the same time. Not a lot of sports where you can do that. If I go golf or go play tennis with that same group, it's really not that fun. So then over the last 5 years, Bryce, I'm Bryce Morgan. I had a comment to introduce myself. Bryce Morgan, I helped run and organize the professional pickleball tour. Been doing it for about 5 years. So 5 years ago, there was a lot more of that, like, look over the shoulder. What are these guys doing? We went to a lot of traditional tennis facilities. We'd paint them over. We'd put some tape down to run some tournaments. We organized, obviously, the best players in the country to bring them in for prize money, and we run amateur events at the same time. So, we'll see upwards of 3,000-4,000 people come into a tennis facility over a week, take it over, put it on live TV, and then a lot of times paint back some of the pickleball courts back to tennis. And in some cases, we'd leave the pickleball courts that we converted. So we got a couple tennis players that weren't super thrilled with us, and I think that's kind of the conversation I think that used to happen as we'd walk around these tennis facilities. People would snicker at us and kind of say a thing here or there. But honestly, that's really dissipated over the last 5 years. I'd say each year, incrementally, it's gotten a little more friendly and jovial, and you see a lot more of that crossover with those tennis players now playing pickleball. I think it's kind of an age-old tell looking online. Some of the comments of people talking about pickleball and seeing it on TV, they're like, I'll never play that game. The next person responds back, yeah, I used to say that, and then I tried it, and it's really fun, and I still play it. So I think it is a happy thing where everybody's playing, everybody's getting out, getting some exercise, playing racket sports, and echo the other statements. We kind of all want to rise together, and I think there's a lot of crossover.
I was one of those people too. So, look, I think as well, how would you, look at Padel as a pickleball guy? Would you say you're kind of looking over the shoulder, thinking, actually, how can we work with Padel, or is it sort of not of interest yet in terms of collaborations and partnerships? What's the sort of take, I guess, in the pickleball community about the growth of Padel?
I think it's a little more unknown for us, but I mean, we're definitely additive. We're not scarce-minded of how we view our sport and the growth of our sport. So I think, as that grows, that's good for us as well. Obviously, traditionally, we've seen it be bigger internationally. Pickleball is about 5 years behind the U.S. internationally, so we're starting to see a lot more growth internationally. You mentioned that as well. It's something we're watching, obviously, in some of the courts and places we go, like Brookhaven in Dallas, an invited club. They just put in some courts down there. So we're seeing it pop up more and more, but we're not seeing it really infringe on what we're trying to do or places we're trying to go. So we see it as additive and more people out on the courts.
And I want to add one comment there. So I also think pickleball, in the beginning, everybody thought it was so easy. And so I was with Jeannie Bouchard in Tampa last week, and she was being interviewed, and she literally said the amount of respect she had for the top pickleball players in the world. She goes, I'm not good enough to be in the top 20 as a pickleball player. Okay, this is a former top 10 tennis player on the WTA tour who is now given the amount of respect to the top pros in pickleball. That's why I feel that your professional space, Bryce, has now arrived, is because it's not a common skill set.
We could, Bryce, anything you want to say there, we can come back to that, because I think that's a really interesting point. Yeah, okay. Jake, we have all been chatting about this WhatsApp groups. It's been a frenzy in our paddle and pickleball worlds. I think, tennis has got years of experience of dealing with many people, I guess, providing a running commentary on its own sport and other sports in comparison. Was there any reaction in kind of your experience of kind of, with tennis colleagues or the USTA or others? It happened during Wimbledon when there's multiple stories going on. Again, we're seeing it through our lens, but I'm sure through your lens, it might have been different.
Yeah, like Bryce said, that thread from Novak was floating around our group chats and getting talked about over here too. When the number one voice in the tennis world speaks up about it, everyone's going to listen. And I think what he said is spot on. I mean, we're all talking here today about all racket sports, not just tennis. And all the conversation here is positive. Pickleball can succeed, Padel could succeed, tennis can succeed, and we can all be great together. Novak called and mentioned that tennis is at risk of being endangered. And I think there's some truth to that in the regard that we see reasons for why pickleball and paddle are booming the way they are. And there is opportunity for tennis to learn from that, to make sure tennis stays relevant too, and all racket sports grow. The greatest thing to ever happen to Coca-Cola was the introduction of Pepsi. Coke realized that they need to innovate and can't just stay being the same product for years to come. And we see how pickleball and padel are welcoming this social play, this easier to learn. No knock on the professionals, not saying it's an easy sport to play, but an easier sport to learn and play for the very first time. And understanding, are there ways for tennis to capitalize and build on this too, and introduce ways for the sport of tennis to be played in easier ways, maybe on non-traditional aspects. It doesn't have to be on a 78-foot court with a yellow ball that's going to bounce over your head if you've never played for the first time. So it's stirring great conversation around here. And I think all of our racket sports have a great opportunity to learn from each other.
Is that, Ryan, is that something, you know, we don't, again, hear much about that as pickle and paddle maybe being an entry to tennis even. You know, again, if people are exposed to clubs that have all three sports on offer, surely that is going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen equally from existing tennis players going into paddle because it's a new sport, or pickle because it's a newish sport as well. But, you know, what are you, how realistic is that for people to move from, I guess, you know, pickle and paddle into tennis?
Was that Brian or Ryan?
Right. Sorry, Ryan, Redondo. Yeah.
Okay. So how realistic is it for pickle and paddle players to get into tennis?
Yeah, I think to evolve into tennis players, are we going to see that happen to a degree as well?
Well, I think by introducing it at the younger level, what Jonathan said, he's got it in camps, what we're doing with 5, 6, 7-year-olds. And we're going to expand that into our nonprofit side as well. So when we go out into the communities and we can put a pickleball paddle in their hand, or a padel, which is going to be a little more difficult because of the infrastructure issues. But if we start it now, then yes, I believe that transition into tennis will help tennis grow as well.
And just an interesting kind of specific question, I guess, for you with Taktika's model. Are you looking at actually all of your clubs going to, you know, be having pickle alongside, or what's the sort of strategy? Does it depend on the location and the competition of other pickleball facilities in the area? What's your general take on expanding the Taktika brand?
Yeah, so we're expanding with pickleball as well. So at UOP up in Stockton at the university, we put 8 designated pickleball courts in right next to the Padel, which has 12 tennis courts as well. So we're looking to add that all in because we believe that, again, if we can get more pickleball players in that are already playing in that market or that area, and they see Padel, then they'll start to play it. And again,
oh, we don't keep going. I'm sorry. I just
So it's that crossover brand that we're looking to build and continue to grow in that community, or whichever community we're going into. And then depending on the partnership that we have, they already might have tennis courts there or a pickleball program, and so we'll come in and bring in the Padel.
I just wanted to add, Ron, I think you nailed it right there. If you get younger players into all 3 sports, or all 4 or 5 sports, it's like learning a language at a young age. You can learn 3, 4, 5 languages if you do it early enough. Could you imagine what the athletes could look like in 10 to 20 years if they all learn each sport as they grow? Think about how the games of all the games will change, and the skills that they can learn, and the opportunity that provides. Sorry to go back to coaching and professional, and the professional world, but think about what opportunity that would create for, again, new jobs and new career paths for coaches, to actually take them all the way through that process and then let them choose, or maybe they could do all. Could you imagine, a multi-sport athlete like that could be really good at all of them? I think you're right. It's starting at that younger level and that younger age.
Yeah, and I think the difference with Padel compared to tennis and pickleball, I think you're seeing all the tennis players transitioning to pickleball, and now it's somewhat, whether they're college players or not, being at the highest level. In Padel, you have the best players in the world that have never hit a tennis ball.
Right.
They've had a paddle racket in their hand, and that mindset, they know how to play. Their brain is strategically thinking differently. And we have Grand Slam players on our Stingrays team that would never even touch the court, because these players from Argentina and Spain are just so advanced. So getting them early right here in San Diego, or if you're in Texas or wherever, and they learn it, I think, like you said, in 10 years, it's going to be a completely different landscape, and you're going to start to see the American flag next to all those names in the rankings.
I want to chime in, Bryce. Just a comment, and you may not have an answer to this, but I don't know what you're seeing. I don't think you guys are really doing anything, but what are you seeing from a pipeline program and entry of from a younger generation from pickleball? I know it's easier to get it in people's hands. They're playing as families, they're playing younger, but are you seeing anything interesting on the pickleball pipeline side? To kind of talk about that.
Oh, for sure. Like I think there's two prongs to that question. The first is on our own tour, our own amateurs that we have. We have family socials, we have junior pickleball tournaments, and those are just ballooning everywhere we go. It started, there's 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 juniors that would sign up for our events, and now we're getting closer to the 50 to 100 per event that we get. So we're gonna have our own junior standings, our own junior program, and then the flip side of that, just the growth of pickleball in all, right? Like a place like Utah where it's growing like crazy. You're starting to see it integrated in high school sports. And so then you're getting it in the hands and actually having high competitions in high schools playing each other. So that is definitely fueling, the high competition of the sport, and then the young players getting into it early.
Jonathan, I just want to kind of delve a little bit more into your collection, big collection of clubs. Like what do you kind of see as your members and your target customers, if I can say that, demanding? Obviously, you've only got a couple of paddle, courts now, but that's surely going to change. People talk about the different culture of the sports, and paddle being, very social and, kind of a bit more intimate because of kind of the proximity of the players and the social aspect there, as well as off the court. Do you think you're going to see kind of your members, demand these new sports and kind of also spend their time differently at the clubs as well? They're going to, are we going to see paddle players spend more time at the cafe or bar than tennis players? What's it going to be like in 5 to 10 years of the kind of modern country club?
Yeah, I think you're going to see these 3 sports at all of our clubs. Currently, right? Like, here's just a little insight into us. Our pickleball conversions are going on courts 1 and 2, closest to the clubhouse, closest to food and beverage, closest to the patios, closest to sitting around, hanging out for the 2 or 3 hours people are there. Padel, we're having to, improvise areas, whether it's parking lot, because it's concrete based, it's a little bit more limited, which the majority of our clubs are in the South, which are asphalt. So it's a little tricky there. Basically, our members want nice, they want new, and they want upkept. So, I made a little note here. We've resurfaced 200 tennis courts in the last 2 years. Okay. Wow. We've obviously, I've already shared with you about our pickleball presence. We don't use the cheap nets. We don't use lines. We're not building. We're not basically having joint use courts. It's not tennis with pickleball lines. We want our pickleball players to have the best experience, and we want our tennis players to have the best experience. We don't want them to cross over. I think paddle, for us, it's a sexier consumer. Little bit more club spend. They are willing to pay a little bit more. They are very international at this stage. We have had a lot of high-end tennis players cross over into Padel now that it's, we have some courts. We are not seeing a huge growth at the entry level, and we do have programming in place. Rob and I chatted on this about a week back. We need the public parks to make sure that paddle courts are being built in public parks, because that's why tennis is so plentiful, as well as pickleball, because it started in that space. But in terms of our clubs, our members want programming. They want as many offerings as we can have. We have a delivery system. We've got all of our guys and gals certified with USPTA for tennis. We've got them with PPR for pickleball. Now we're working with Dan Santorum on a paddle certification. So we want to make sure that we're delivering for our members what they want, and it's no longer in a stale environment. So we have music, we've got food and beverage, we have pop-up bars. Everything is about building this social component.
And what would you say about the slight wildcard squash? Obviously, it's been around a long time, but it could get a new lease of life from the Olympic admission. Do you think that's something that people are going to be craving more of? Obviously, during the winter months, it's more appealing. Or what's your thought on where squash fits?
We've got 8 squash courts across the Northeast and the Midwest. We also have paddle. So that sport gets left out of a lot of these conversations, right? The sport that's played in Chicago, primarily in New York. And we have growth in that segment as well. I think we're going to find, going back to what you, going back to the question, everything is going to grow if we do it right and we all work together. And everything is going to fail if we don't.
Yeah. Okay, good. Just this is a little reminder, actually, just for anyone listening in to punch in any questions you might have. We'll have time for some questions.
There's
for the
so
guests.
much chatter. There's so much chatter
There's a lot of
happening in the chat. I'm trying to see if there are questions or not, but there's a lot of like full-on conversations happening. So any questions? It's like question in caps, so I could grab it.
Yeah, I wanted to just make a note what Jonathan said. It is for Padel. It is mandatory that the public and municipal sectors put in Padel for it to grow. And that's why at Taktika, we've taken and chosen that model to continue to be in the public model, to go in where people can come in and just play whenever they want and not have that high-end experience. The high-end experience is great. Like he said, it's the sexier model, but to grow the sport, we have to be in that park and municipal level.
But I think Jonathan said it right. I mean, it's a sexier consumer, and I think the nice thing about Padel is that they're used to paying for it, and they're paying very high prices for the court time. I mean, I don't know what you charge in San Diego, but in Miami, they're charging $180, $200, for an hour for court time. So that behavior is just conducive to, like you said, more food and beverage, more activity, and a stickier consumer. So again, that's just creating opportunity everywhere.
Yeah, and that's at the private club level. Here in San Diego, we have a lot of public club models that are all in city SUPs, and that's where we have to continue to drive that side. I mean, we're charging at non-peak times $8 per person to play Padel, which is amazing.
Yeah,
but we also have hundreds of players now playing, and I think that for the growth, that's where we can continue to see it. Just like in Spain, where people are walking into the parks and playing for free.
And let's not forget, the biggest driving is league tennis, right? That's the biggest driver of participation. Okay. Pickleball, we now have internal leagues within a club. We have regional leagues, and then we have something that feeds into a national event. In the paddle space, one of our concerns is if we go into a market and we have the only 4 courts, how are we going to network across other players? Not everybody's going to join our clubs. So one of our concerns is targeting the existing markets like Houston, like San Diego, like LA, where there are already 16 to 20 courts, where we can say, hey, listen, we now have 4, let's build a league, let's get some events. Because if junior tennis grows because of tournament play, right? Adult tennis grows because of league play. Pickleball is growing. It started granularly where it was just free play, pop in and play. Well, now they're getting leveled. They're getting a little bit more organized. They want to play other players, not just at their club. But the other thing we found with pickleball, they don't want to travel. In Atlanta, a tennis player will travel from Peachtree City to Milton, drive 2 hours to play an hour-and-a-half match to drive 2 hours home. Pickleball players aren't driving. So they're like, hey, listen, there's enough of us in this area. We can just go to each other's clubs and play. So we're definitely seeing different characteristics of it.
Okay, I want to circle back just really quickly, Jake, on if you can comment. You might not be the right person to comment, but I know the USTA has been doing some major initiatives on the public side with kind of forgotten courts in different areas, courts that need resurfacing, and there's a huge I think there's a pretty big program that's happening right now. I don't know if you're able to comment on that or not. I don't know all the in-depth details, but it would be great for you to share just to kind of round out the pipeline comments that we were talking about in the public side.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big initiative behind that is to make sure that the courts that are taking up space in America are best used and utilized. If there are courts that are in a public park but are completely tattered and have cracks in every line and are unplayable, we need to make sure that we're identifying those and refurbishing so people can get out there and playing. So that's really the big objective behind the projects, and making sure that we're able to get people on the tennis courts that are out there.
Yeah, I'd love to share with everyone after this I know there's some really interesting stats, and you're doing some great stuff there. So I want to make sure that doesn't go unnoticed.
Thank you.
I want to we've just come off the back of an amazing Paris Olympic Games, and I just want to dive into the kind of Olympic question as well for both sports, paddle and pickle in a second. But Jake, while we're with you, just an interesting one in terms of, you know, some countries like Australia, we see Tennis Australia taking on paddle. In the UK, we've got the LTA taking on paddle. It's obviously different in the US. Is there, you know, has there been in the past interest in the USTA looking at paddle in that way, or what's the kind of obviously things have evolved differently, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, so specific to Padel, we are very early on in the US in the growth of this sport. We are way behind every other country who's adopted it so far. So our data that we have shows roughly 1% of the country playing the sport, far less than pickleball and tennis players. So I think it's far too early to see the demand there, but undoubtedly from the conversations we're having is going to come here eventually. So it's conversations that are definitely relevant to be had. The one thing I want to mention on it, with the growth of all these sports, it's important to remember too, and I think just highlights how important it is that all of us are in the same conversation right now, is pickleball and padel are growing like crazy. Tennis is also about to experience its 6th straight year of growth. So these sports don't necessarily deter from the others. We aren't seeing a mass outflux of tennis players to go play these other sports. There's opportunity to continue to have all these grow together. So I think that's the biggest thing that we're looking at the USTA, is how to make sure that we're learning from all of these sports and growing tennis appropriately, and less so viewing it as this fight or war to make sure one sport beats the other.
Just one for Bryce. Pickleball, in terms of the question, let's get started on this Olympic question. So what's in your view, the ambitions of pickleball as it comes to the Olympic Games? I think I know the answer there, as with every sport that's not in the Games. But what's the talk in terms of a potential timeline? Obviously, you can never be complacent. You've got to go through the criteria with the IOC. But what's the thinking in the pickleball world about whether or when or if this becomes an Olympic sport?
Yeah, right after the closing ceremonies in Paris, I think you guys probably saw ESPN posted on their social medias a picture of a pickleball paddle and said it's pickleball next. So we obviously think it is. We think it's good for the growth of our game. We think it's good for the growth of the pro game. Again, I think pickleball is 5 years behind the United States internationally. So if you had pickleball in Paris Olympics, it would have been pretty much dominated by American flags. So that's not as fun for an Olympic sport yet. But there's definitely growth. I think we're going to see it being tested in LA, and I wouldn't be shocked if it was part of it in Australia in 2032.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're hearing, what we're seeing. Obviously, there's a lot of groups that are working through the IOC and different specifications and getting it kind of aligned. But that's kind of our pulse and what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and what we're trying to help push to happen.
And Ryan, from your side, and paddle, and through USPTA discussions and International Paddle Federation discussion, where do you think paddle's ambition lies in terms of the reality of when it could become an Olympic sport? And yeah, could it be Brisbane, or are we looking one further down the line?
I would certainly hope it's in LA, because we have 4 paddle courts where they're going to be playing tennis and some of the other sports. Whether that's an adopted sport or even just a trial or exhibition games, I think it would be wonderful. There are a lot of requirements that a sport has to go through. I have the list on my phone here because people ask me this all the time. There's a lot of things that every country has to be able to do. So you have to have, say, 90 countries that have a federated organization, association. You have to have equality between men and women in the sport. You have to check a lot of boxes for that to actually become an Olympic sport. So we are hopeful. I think it's probably Australia that Padel is. But going to Bryce's point, being a little bit more behind internationally, is Padel, like tennis, has had this pathway where you can go onto an international team and play a world championship. Pickleball is going to be there soon. It's probably going to be sooner than in the United States in the collegiate space, probably. So I think they're just kind of working at different parallels. One's at 5 feet ahead, one's 10 feet behind, and it's going to continue to kind of go upstream there. But for Padel in the Olympics, hopeful in LA that there's some kind of exhibition game to it or something, but there's a lot to be done.
And obviously to build those, Team USAs, Team Australias, whoever it may be, you need the pathway, you need to be working at the younger generations now in the schools and colleges. I know that's part of your kind of enthusiasm is really focused on those age groups as well. What needs to happen there? And obviously you're looking at it already with what you've done in Stockton. How can you get into the kind of educational establishments to make paddle and pickle more commonplace?
Yeah, like I said, I think pickleball, collegiately in high school sports, interscholastically is going to be there soon, if it's not already going to be adopted. For Padel, it's the infrastructure issue, right? You have to get courts in, and that's one thing Taktika is doing. Is we're looking at partnerships through universities. We have the 4 in Stockton. We put 8 designated pickleball courts. That's the other thing that we're doing is we're not taking tennis courts away. We're in any model. We're just adding to it. And adding designated courts. So that's going to be definitely a positive for the growth. But, I just heard in Texas, a high school just put in, I think, 4 paddle courts. So we have to be able to adopt that more. You see they've done in the UK, they have a whole college system now where they're now competing as teams. You can do that without courts on the campus, but you're going to have courts around. So it's really it's an infrastructure thing and being able to get enough players, by that matter, playing the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just ask, and Ryan or Bryce, you guys might know this. Does the infrastructure is the governing body positioning themselves for that, or the right people in place to make both pickle and padel happen in the Olympics?
On the pickleball side, there's a little bit of noise. There's definitely the federations internationally that are happening. So there's still a little bit of infighting is probably the best way to say it, that we're kind of getting together, get on the same page to make it happen. But I think that the natural, how many people are playing and how fast it's growing are definitely help pushing that quickly.
Yeah, Brian, I think some of the challenges right now, one of the biggest outlier is you must have one unifying body. Pickleball has 3. So they're going to have to work through that. Padel is ahead of it administratively behind the sport. Something that we're not talking about is college. And college racket sports are in trouble. Okay, so let's not kid ourselves. With that NCAA lawsuit that just came through, we're going to have a lot of club tennis and club pickleball and perhaps club padel. But the collegiate model, that's the one we need to pay attention to. And I think if we keep growing these players and, we keep it in the if it gets into the Olympics, even as an exhibition, that's going to keep eyes on the sport. But my concern with tennis is if the collegiate pathway becomes much smaller or only becomes power 3 schools, we're going to have a lot of players that are going to say, listen, I don't want to play junior tennis anymore because there is no collegiate pathway. Where now I may play pickleball because there is. Because that's the part I think we all need to discuss and have an answer for in the next couple of years, because we will have impact on the future pathway of tennis.
Great. Well, look, we've got some questions that have come in.
Ben, I have one for you that kind of came in, but it's a question for you. So I'm going to spin it and put you on the spot. How's that sound?
Depends what it is, Robyn.
I got to keep it interesting for everybody. So a question that came in, and I'm directing it toward you, and anyone else could chime in, but it's what can we all learn more on the pickleball and paddle side from squash, the life cycle of squash, where it was boomed in the 80s, but never really kept growing after that. So I know you have you actually have multi-racket sport background, which is why you're kind of helping lead this discussion, but can you chime in on that and maybe some takeaways of what we all on this call can learn?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak about squash, having played tennis as a kid and then sort of moved over to squash in my teens, I suppose. It was a big sport in a country like the UK in the 70s, 80s, 90s to an extent. There were squash clubs everywhere. Essentially what happened, participation declined. I think a lot of businesses realized they could monetize more with setting up gyms, which weren't commonplace before then, gyms and cycle studios and all these things which came in. And so a lot of squash clubs got converted into those, into retail as well. So it sort of happened hand in hand. The game's been in decline in the UK. It's been in decline in many countries. I think it's actually bucked, squash I'm talking, has bucked that trend in the US, interestingly. So it's not been that case everywhere. But what we do know is for years, squash has been trying to get the nod to be admitted into the Olympics, thinking it's a pretty global sport, not everywhere, but it's pretty global. And, it hadn't managed to get the favorable outcome. And then, all of a sudden, I think to a lot of us, a surprise was when it got admitted to the upcoming LA games. So look, it's been, like I say, in decline for many years. It's a very tough sport, from a fitness point of view. It's maybe doesn't have the same social aspect as paddle. It's not quite as easy to pick up, similar to tennis, quite technical in many ways. So it has things working against it compared to some of the more modern sports. But what I would say is it's more than any, it's an incredible workout. It's great fun when you get to a decent level and can have a really competitive game. And I think it's great to watch in person. I do think kind of one of the holdbacks was it's not great on television. And that would have been a big factor in the Olympic Games, looking at how kind of, attractive it can be on people's TV sets. But it's got a chance now to really do a great job leading up to the LA Games and to actually kind of reboot it as a sport. So at a very kind of high level, that's what I have seen has happened. And if I was, kind of a squash country, I would be really strategizing how can we use this time in the sun to give our, very old sport a new lease of life and make it attractive to kids again. So, yeah.
And Ben, what did it take for squash to get kind of back to Olympic prowess or at least on the radar again? Because obviously that took some retrenching and some reorganization.
I would love to say I knew the answer, but it took a lot of us by surprise, I think. My understanding is there were people kind of involved in the process who, had been lobbying for many years, and something must have, I don't know what it was, something must have flicked. I suppose the fact it's in the US, whether it's accident or design, it has been actually doing quite well, obviously in the Northeast more than most parts. That's a nice coincidence, perhaps, that it's home games for a country where it's doing well, participation.
Brian, I wrote down, if we're interested, we'll do some background research on that for everyone, and just so we can get to the story.
It'd be a great blueprint for everybody. I mean, follow.
That's what I'm saying. I think it's a good. There's some parallels and potentially some pitfalls we can all maybe avoid, but also parallels for pickle and paddle on the Olympic pathways. So we have some really great friends there.
But I would go back to this decline that you just mentioned as well, Jonathan. But to Jonathan and Ryan, do you see in any sport decline that you've seen over the years? My assumption or my theory is it comes from energy, whether that's the Community Tennis Association, the professionals there, the management. But again, it goes back to that utilization. If courts are being utilized for whatever sport, I can't imagine people looking at alternatives. So, if squash is on fire in certain clubs or facilities, nobody's going to look at that and say, I could do something else with it. Would you see that as well as kind of catalyst for keeping things going and that energy? But I think it goes down to people, right?
Yeah, I'll go, Ryan, I'll go first. So you're absolutely correct. It's how we're delivering. Tennis inventory of courts may have been a little bit too high. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we're taking some courts to convert to pickleball, outside of the primetime windows, 9 to noon, 5 to 10, that's when all of our courts are full. No matter what the offering is, they're full. It's those shoulder hours from 12 to 3 that we're trying to fill. Now, I will say, though, every club, I travel extensively. Every club that I visit, there's always pickleball players out there. Okay? It's commonplace at every club. Tennis, primetime windows, there's people out there. Non-prime, there's rarely people out there. I think for pickleball to grow like it did, it was all over social media from every different level. And it wasn't coming from PPA or USA Pickleball. It was coming from these ambassadors, these US pickleball ambassadors. It was coming at a grassroots level. And they took a message and they just drove it home. Mm-hmm. I don't think tennis has that marketing right now. I think that's a big miss. And, I'll be in New York with you guys here pretty soon. I think that's the miss on tennis. I think Padel right now is positioning itself really well with its marketing message. It was in Forbes the other day. It was in the Business Journal the other day. Tennis doesn't have that, whether it's the marketing firm behind it. We have to bring it more mainstream into the bigger publications so people understand tennis isn't dying. Heck, we don't even see it declining. Okay. I mean, our financials were up 10%, participation's up 30%. We're not seeing decline. We're not seeing death. All we're seeing is we have two other sports that right now are being marketed across all platforms, and tennis has zero.
Jake, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, the one thing, just to build on it and kind of validate what Jonathan is saying, we just did a recent piece of research and saw that players who are playing tennis for the very first time in their life right now are as likely to play tennis because they were inspired by influencers and celebrities as they are from watching Novak Djokovic and the pros play. And so it just hones in on the point. It also shows that people are being inspired on social media. Challenger's movie came out, Zendaya being involved in tennis helps the sport too. But just shows how big of a sport for all racket sports, pop culture is, social media influencers is to growing the game.
On that, I think pickleball's done a good job of enlisting celebs and some former tennis people, but people from outside tennis in sports entertainment. Bryce, what's the, again, from what you're aware, what's the strategy internationally for pickleball? Because we know about the direction in the US, which is pretty remarkable, but internationally, bring it into the Olympic question, bring it into some of the other big markets. I was hearing India is, starting to move now with Padel, but it's also starting to move with pickleball. And someone was saying, well, China will be a big pickleball market. Some of the Asian markets, I can see it becoming popular very quickly. What's your view on where it's going to grow outside the US?
Yeah, you're right. And that echoes one of the questions we have from Luis. It's definitely growing in those areas you mentioned. And in 2025, we have a handful of international stops planned. Those are not announced yet. We also have a handful of new partnerships with people like Australia. Our relationship with BPA Australia is obviously very public, and there's a model that's working there, and we're looking to move that with other countries as well. So you'll see 4 or 5, maybe 6 international stops in 2025. We'll probably be more like PGA Tour model. How there's PGA Tour, Europe, PGA Tour, other countries, right? We'll have something similar to that, and then we'll have a marquee stop at some of these countries like India, Australia, China. Do something in Canada for the first time, hoping to next year. So that's going to be a little bit more of our model. So yeah, kind of a little bit of a franchise, a little bit of a copy of the PPA Tour model in those countries, and then we can have some cross-pollination there.
Ben, I wanted to go back just to talk about a little bit on the tennis side from what Jake was saying. We run a WTA tournament here in San Diego, and the numbers that we get from our data of viewership around the world it's awesome. I mean, we'll have millions, and some upwards to 18 million people watch our tournament over 1 week. To Jonathan's point, during all of the basketball and the WNBA and the craze that went a few weeks ago with the draft and everything, we didn't see enough of women's tennis being marketed, right? You did see a lot of pickleball, and I saw a lot of that on social media, what they're doing. But we have this huge sport women's tennis is the #1 watched sport in the world, women's tennis, for women's sports. We have to be able to take that and get that into the market. We have to expose how important it is. That helps us get sponsorships. That helps us get a title sponsor. When you know that our title sponsor is a fraction of what it is for a PGA Tour sponsor, yet you're going to get X amount of millions of people all over the world watching your sport. So I think for Bryce and for Padel and stuff, being able to market how it is a participatory sport, but also a spectator sport, is going to be crucial as we continue to grow these sports, or you will see one die off and basketball will continue to fill its space.
Just real quick on that. So that Alcaraz Djokovic match at the Olympics, I'm assuming we've all watched it. That was one of the best tennis matches I've seen it's been forever since I saw a match of that caliber, right? We need that out there more often, because if you turn on it, a casual sports fan is not going to turn on a tennis match and sit down and watch. A casual sports fan's not going to sit down and watch a pickleball match. They'll watch for a couple minutes. If it really pulls them in, they'll watch a little bit longer. But for the most part, the baseball fan, the football fan, the basketball fan, we have to bring them into our racket sports to drive exposure. When LeBron James bought a pickleball team, that's all I heard about. Tom Brady, that's all I heard about. We have to make sure that we have celebrities driving our sport and we have high-end tennis being played, and then it's also accessible to the viewer.
Yeah, good point. One final question, actually, and I'll put this to Ryan, but anyone else that wants to chime in. In terms of had a question that's come on the real estate considerations and I guess the costs, comparing pickleball to paddle. Ryan, can you give us kind of ballpark figures of what we're, talking about what you've got to bear in mind when you're thinking about building pickleball courts versus paddle? And I'm sure it varies, but just to give our listeners a bit of a steer.
Yeah, for Taktika, again, we're building brand new pickleball courts, so it's costly. We're doing the whole infrastructure from ground up. We're not taking tennis courts away. And if you look at some of the issues that the two sports have had before, it's because, all right, pickleball, all you have to do is go and restripe the court, and now you have pickleball courts, and you've taken a tennis court away. So those are some of the issues that we've seen. But if you're just looking at, and you just want to know about the real estate, Padel is going to be quite expensive. You've got to buy the court. Until we can get American manufacturers here, you're shipping courts from Spain. The high quality courts, the best courts are from Spain. You can get them from China that are cheaper, but my recommendation, get a good court because it's going to last longer. But you're looking at a minimum of, $40,000 to $50,000 to do it right. You've got to get permits. There's a lot more to it for Padel compared to pickleball. And that's why I think you see pickleball's growth it's very easy to put in and do. My
placeholder for Braemar in LA was 120 grand for 2 Padel courts. It's now swollen to 215. Okay. And that's because of the site preparation, right? All the different construction costs. So right now we are forecasting as invited, it's about $70,000 per court installed, whether we have to add concrete pad or whatever. So that is going to be cost prohibitive in some of our markets to grow this sport. And I'm working with Ryan on that project in LA. And the challenge is, what is the cash on cash return over 3 years? And that's what we're still trying to figure out to make sure that this makes sense to add to our portfolio.
Yeah. Interesting sums. Robyn, anything you want to say? I mean, I think that's a good place certainly from my side. We've got some good questions that have come in. Thanks to you all, but over to Robyn.
Yeah. Ben, Ryan, Brian, Jake, Bryce, Jonathan, thank you so much. It was a really lively conversation, although very lively over in the chat. Which is telling to me that there is a need for information in this space, and RacquetX is happy to be the home court for all of that and continue that commitment to the industry. Housekeeping item, March 22nd to the 24th, 2025, mark your calendars. Miami will be the place to be yet again. Any ideas, please, we try and keep this very transparent. Email me, probably going to regret it, but Kai, if you could toss Robyn at the RacquetX down in the chat. I see you chatting a lot. Feel free if there's ideas, thoughts, things you want to see, email the team by all means. We do take all of the messages to heart. It might take me a minute to get back to you or the team, but we love the feedback because we're building this for you. And we wouldn't have an event if it weren't for all of you. So thank you. What an awesome first webinar for us. We're going to do another one next month on a relevant topic that's coming out. We have some pretty good ideas for it. So stay tuned. Follow along. Head to our website if you haven't followed along to have newsletter updates. We always post on LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. But we want to hear from you. Thank you. Have a great rest of the summer. And hopefully we'll see you all on the road. We're going to be at the PPL tournament soon. Some of us will be at the US Open. Feel free. We'd love to say hi. And of course, there's some pickleball things that we'll be at all fall that are a little bit further down the road. Brian will be at the USPTA event. We are literally going to be everywhere. So we can't wait to see everybody. Don't be shy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.